All right, so we've got a really interesting deep dive ahead of us today.
Yeah, this one's been generating a lot of buzz online.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's talking about these QSA Lanedri cables.
Some people are calling them revolutionary.
Yeah, I've seen some pretty wild claims out there,
Definitely a healthy dose of skepticism, too, though.
as there should be with any new tech, especially in the audio world.
Right, especially when the company itself is being so mysterious.
Yeah, what's the deal with this quantum level treatment they keep talking about?
It's anyone's guess they're very tight-lipped about their actual methods.
Makes you wonder if it's more science or alchemy, right?
A little bit of both, maybe.
And the other thing that struck me is they're not even making these cables from scratch.
Right, they're taking pre-made cables from reputable brands like Blue Jeans Cable,
Iconoclast.
Sablon Audio.
And then doing something to them.
Exactly, and that's what everyone's trying to figure out.
But here's the thing. Despite all the secrecy, they offer a money-back guarantee.
And that seems to be swaying even the most hardcore skeptics.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, try it, you won't be disappointed.
Exactly. So let's dive into what people are actually experiencing.
You pulled some great threads from the What's Best forum.
Yeah, there are some pretty mind-blowing stories in there.
One user was listening to Neil Fromm on his system after getting QSA Lanedri cables.
Yeah.
He was hearing details he'd never noticed before, like Fromm breathing,
Wow.
the piano pedals, even the hammers hitting the strings
Maybe.
so vividly that his wife thought there was construction going on.
That's incredible.
And it's not just about hearing more detail. It seems to be affecting people on an emotional level, too.
Right. There's this other user who talked about how his wife was never really into just sitting and listening to music.
But after they brought QSA Lanedri into their setup, she's completely changed.
Making song requests, really getting into the experience.
It makes you wonder, can a cable really be responsible for that kind of shift?
It's a big question, right?
Or is there some sort of audiophile placebo effect happening?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely something we'll keep exploring as we go deeper.
So to understand what might be going on, we need to talk about the QSA Lanedri product line itself.
Right. They have three main tiers: Gamma, Spectra, and then the Ultimatum.
And within each tier, there are variations.
Exactly. So it's pretty extensive range.
From what I'm gathering from these forum posts, people are finding improvements at each level.
Yeah. They start with the Gamma, and even there, it's like a veil has been lifted.
And then they move up to the Spectra or the Ultimatum, and it just keeps getting better.
The Gamma series is where a lot of people jump in. It's considered their entry-level line.
But even the Gamma cables are getting rave reviews.
Oh, yeah. Overwhelmingly positive feedback.
You've got the Gamma Revelation and then the Gamma Infinity.
And users are saying that jump to Infinity makes a noticeable difference.
Especially in clarity and realism.
There's a great story from one forum member who was convinced a LAN cable wouldn't impact his sound.
So he got the Gamma Revelation Ethernet cable, fully intending to return it. He swapped back to his old cable, and the drop-in quality was so obvious he kept the QSA.
And I bet he didn't stop there.
He ended up buying more of their products.
It seems like the closer you get to the source, the more pronounced the effect is.
Right. This same user then tried a QSA Silver Fuse in his Farad Super 3 power supply for his NVIDIA Shield Pro.
And he was blown away by the improvement.
Despite the fuse costing nearly $5,000.
So you start with Gamma, then you've got the Spectra line in the middle.
They're using Sablon cables as the base for these.
And people are making direct comparisons to other high-end cables.
One user even said the Spectra power cable outperformed a Hijiri Takumi.
Wow, that's a serious contender.
And then, of course, you reach the summit with the Ultimatum series.
These are the ones that get people using words like transformative.
Like they're in a whole different league.
One reviewer went so far as to say the Ultimatum speaker cables are the best he's ever heard, period.
Wow, that's a bold statement.
It is, but before we crown QSA Lanedri the king of cables, there's another layer to this.
Okay, what's that?
A lot of the really jaw-dropping improvements seem to be tied to the Ultimatum line.
Because of the connectors.
Exactly. They're using things like Boccinos and Jaegers.
Those are top of the line.
The Ultimatum speaker cables, for instance, use a 40 AWG wire.
That's massive.
They had to have custom spade connectors made because nothing on the market could handle it.
And the prototype power cable uses a wall plug that looks like it belongs in an industrial setting.
So we've got all these vivid descriptions of how these cables are changing people's listening experiences.
But is there anything beyond the anecdotal?
Right. Is there any science to back this up?
That's where Alpha Audio comes in.
Exactly. They got their hands on the Ultimatum Infinity speaker cables and ran some measurements.
And what did they find?
exceptionally high conductivity, even better than any other cable they've tested.
So that's at least something concrete.
Some evidence that there's a measurable difference with these cables.
Okay, so we're starting to get a clearer picture.
We've got the mystery of their process, the range of cables, the positive feedback, and now these intriguing measurements.
Where do we go from here? What else have you dug up?
Well, one thread that really caught my attention delves into the possible science behind this.
Okay, let's hear.
There's a lot of speculation on the forums about how these cables might be achieving such impressive results.
Yeah, I saw some theories floating around about electropulsing, even quantum entanglement.
It gets pretty out there.
It does, but that's part of the fun, right?
Absolutely. One theory that seems to be gaining traction is that QSA Lanedri is using some form of electropulsing.
Good. For those of us who aren't electrical engineers, what is electropulsing exactly?
So basically, it's a technique that uses high voltage, short duration electrical pulses to change the structure of metals.
At a microscopic level.
Yeah, you're essentially rearranging the atoms to create a more uniform and therefore more conductive material.
So they're zapping these cables with electricity to improve their performance.
In a way, yes.
Is there any actual science to back that up?
There's been a growing body of research on electropulsing, particularly its application in improving the conductivity of copper.
Which is obviously a key component of audio cables.
Right. It's even being explored for other applications like strengthening metals and making them more resistant to corrosion.
That's pretty fascinating. But wouldn't that require some pretty specialized equipment?
Exactly. It's not something you could just do in your basement.
So if QSA is using electropulsing, they've figured out a way to do it safely and effectively at scale.
Which, given the range of cables they offer, would be quite a feat.
It would also explain why they're being so secretive.
Right. If they've cracked the code on a technique like this, they'd want to protect that intellectual property.
Okay, so electropulsing is one possibility, but what about those wilder theories I saw?
The ones about quantum entanglement.
Yeah, people talking about these cables tapping into some mystical energy field.
Honestly, that's veering into science fiction territory.
Yeah, I figured as much.
While quantum entanglement is a real phenomenon, there's no evidence to suggest it can be harnessed in the way some people are describing.
But hey, it's fun to speculate.
Absolutely. And to be fair to those on the forum, the lack of information from QSA is fueling this imaginative thinking.
It's like a giant puzzle with a few missing pieces, and everyone's trying to figure out how they fit together.
Speaking of puzzles, one thing I found really interesting is that QSA seems to treat just about every type of cable imaginable.
Power cables, speaker cables, interconnects, digital cables, Ethernet cables, HDMI cables, you name it.
They even treat fuses and wall outlets.
It's like they're saying every single point of electrical connection in your system can benefit from their treatment.
And what's even more surprising is that the user feedback seems to support this.
People are reporting positive results with all these different types of QSA products.
It's remarkable.
So if someone's convinced and wants to try these out, where do they even begin?
There was a really helpful post from a longtime audiophile on the forum who shared his approach.
Okay, what did he say?
He suggested starting with a relatively modest setup,
Like what?
a basic computer audio transport, a Daisy a Class D amplifier, and a pair of full-range speakers.
That your significant other will approve of.
Exactly. He believes that in the age of QSA Lanedri, you should prioritize cables above all else.
Yeah, interesting. So even with a modest system, invest in a full loom of QSA Lanedri cables.
That's his recommendation, and he even suggests making it a goal to move up to the ultimatum speaker cables as quickly as possible.
His reasoning being
that the cables have the potential to completely transform your listening experience, even if the rest of your system is relatively basic.
that's a bold claim.
It is, but given the user feedback we've seen, it's hard to dismiss out of hand.
It really challenges the traditional audiophile hierarchy of prioritizing components over cables.
It does, and it speaks to the potential impact these cables are having on people's systems.
They're not just about subtle improvements. They're being described as fundamental game changers.
Right, but even with this technology that supposedly alters conductors at a quantum level, there's still a mention of a burn-in period with these cables.
Yes, some users report that the sound quality improves over time.
Sometimes with ups and downs along the way.
Like what kind of ups and downs?
Well, one user described it as his brain accommodating to what he was hearing.
As if his perception of the music was being recalibrated.
Exactly. Another user noted that the cables seemed to vanish after a few days.
Meaning
Meaning they no longer drew attention to themselves. It was all about the music.
So it's like the treatment unlocks the potential of the cables, but they still need time to settle in.
That's a good way to put it. And QSA Lanedri has actually been experimenting with high wattage burn-in for their Ultimatum Infinity power cables.
Really?
They found this process to have a tremendous impact on the sound quality.
I wonder what they're using.
They're even offering to do this burn-in for customers who have already purchased those cables at no additional cost.
Wow, that's impressive.
Sounds like they're really committed to their customers.
They're also strongly advising against using commercial burn-in machines.
Right. They found the effects can be irreversible and potentially detrimental to QSA Lanedri cables.
So there's a very specific way these cables need to be treated.
It seems so they're still figuring out the optimal burn-in method for each type of cable.
What about Telos Audio?
They've been in touch with them.
Because they specialize in burn-in equipment.
Right. They initially considered using a commercial version of the Telos QBT burn-in machine. After some testing and discussion, they realized they needed a custom solution.
So they're developing a bespoke burn-in machine specifically for QSA Lanedri cables.
That's what it sounds like.
That's a serious commitment to maximizing the performance of their products.
It is, and it's not just the burn-in process. They're constantly refining their designs as well.
Like what?
Well, the Gamma Ethernet cable, for instance, has been updated with a new connector.
And what about people who bought the older version?
They can have their cables upgraded to the latest version.
That's pretty cool.
It's clear, QSA Lanedri is a dynamic company.
Always innovating, always striving to improve.
Exactly, and that's exciting to see.
Especially in a field that can sometimes feel stuck in its ways.
It speaks to their passion for what they're doing.
Okay, so we've covered the potential science, the product line, the burn-in process, their commitment to innovation.
But there's still the elephant in the room.
The lack of transparency.
Exactly. They're incredibly tight-lipped about their treatment process.
And that's creating a lot of skepticism.
Understandably so.
Some forum users have even accused them of trying to pull the wool over people's eyes.
It's a valid concern when a company makes such bold claims without providing much evidence.
Right, there's this idea that maybe the whole thing is just a really elaborate placebo effect.
People convincing themselves they're hearing a difference because everyone else is saying they are.
The power of suggestion can be strong.
Incredibly strong, especially in a subjective field like audiophilia.
But then you have those alpha audio measurements.
And the fact that QSA Lanedri was willing to have their cables independently tested.
It does suggest they're confident in the performance of their products.
Even if they're not ready to reveal all their secrets.
It's a tricky situation.
It is, on the one hand, you want companies to be open and transparent.
But on the other hand, you can understand their desire to protect their intellectual property.
Especially if they've developed something truly groundbreaking.
So what's the best approach?
I think it's to stay curious, but also remain discerning.
Don't dismiss them out of hand, but also don't blindly buy into the hype.
Exactly. If you're genuinely curious, the best thing to do is try the cables for yourself.
They offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you really have nothing to lose.
Except maybe your skepticism.
And sometimes losing a bit of skepticism can be a good thing.
It can open you up to new possibilities and experiences.
Before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, there's one more aspect of the QSA Lanedri discussion I wanted to touch on.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It's this idea of ease that so many users describe when listening with QSA Lanedri cables.
Especially with the higher-end ones.
Yeah, it's not just about hearing more detail. It's about a fundamental shift in how the music is perceived.
Like a different way of listening.
Exactly. One user described it as no longer feeling like he was turning up the volume.
But rather turning up the musicians themselves.
I love that.
He could listen at higher volumes without experiencing fatigue or discomfort.
But he could also listen at lower volumes and still feel the impact of the music.
Right, it's like these cables are removing some kind of barrier.
A little distortion, maybe.
And that leads to another point that came up repeatedly, the impact on tonal density.
Tonal density.
Yeah, users described it as tonal saturation, weight, gravitas.
Even putting more meat on the bones.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
not just about hearing more detail, it's about the music feeling more present, more substantial.
And this seems to be especially true with the Ultimatum Infinity cables.
One user who had experience with several QSA Lanedri cables noted that the impact of the Ultimatum Infinity was qualitatively different.
How so?
Well, while the other cables had a more immediate impact on clarity and detail.
The Ultimatum Infinity cables created this sense of ease and transformed the tonal density in a way he'd never experienced before. Do you think that increased conductivity we talked about could be playing a role in this?
It's certainly possible. Higher conductivity could mean that more of the musical signal is getting through.
Resulting in a richer, fuller sound.
The same user also mentioned that dynamic swings were more dramatic.
and that music with a lot of high-frequency content was more enjoyable.
He even said that poorly recorded music lost its ability to annoy him,
Wow.
though it was still recognizable as such.
So it's not like it was making bad recordings sound good.
No, but it was smoothing out the rough edges without sacrificing detail or accuracy.
So we've got this mystery surrounding their process, this incredibly passionate user feedback, and these intriguing measurements from Alpha Audio.
It's quite a combination.
It is QSA. Lanedri is clearly a divisive topic in the audiophile world,
Some people are completely blown away, others remain skeptical.
but they're forcing us to rethink what's possible with cables,
They're challenging long-held assumptions and pushing the boundaries.
which is always a good thing.
It sparks debate, encourages innovation, and ultimately leads to a deeper understanding.
So where does this leave our listener? What's the takeaway?
I think the takeaway is that QSA Lanedri is a fascinating case study in the intersection of science perception and the pursuit of audio perfection.
Whether you believe the hype or remain skeptical, there's no denying that they've made a big splash.
They've definitely struck a chord.
And if you're curious about whether these cables can live up to the hype, the best way to find out is try them for yourself.
Exactly. Form your own opinion based on your own listening experience.
As with anything in audio, the most important thing is how the music makes you feel.
If QSA Lanedri can enhance your connection to the music, then perhaps the price is worth considering.
We've only scratched the surface of this topic.
There's so much more to explore.
So keep digging, keep listening, and keep that skepticism in check.
Until next time, happy listening.